Some of you will have met Diana yesterday when she was doing various other things, but I'll do a brief introduction in case you weren't here, which is Diana is the award-winning author of Ordinary People, The Wonder, and 26A, 3 novels. Her prize nominations include the Guardian and Commonwealth Best First Book Awards, and she was the inaugural winner of the Orange Award for New Writers. Ordinary People was nominated for the Andrew Carnegie Medals for Excellence in Fiction, selected in the New Yorker Best Books of 2018. It's shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction this year and the Rathbones Folio Prize. And I think shortlisted for some other prizes which are all under embargo, and we're not supposed to know about that, so we're not mentioning that. So this is an opportunity. Ordinary People is the latest and is outside, but it's also an opportunity to talk to Diana about her 3 novels because they actually throw up quite complementary themes, I think. They all cover family, relationships, and they have an incredible sense of place. Universal, sweeping themes of absence, inheritance, class, race, gender, and all set mostly in contemporary London. Very specific urban settings. 26A was in North London, The Wonder was mostly in West London, and Ordinary People, South London. So the obvious opener really is, why contemporary London for all your work so far?
Well, I grew up in London, and I do seem to be, well, my fiction seems to be following me around. So I grew up in northwest London, and my first novel was set there. And I lived in West London for about 10 years, and now I live in South London. I think my next novel is probably going to be in East London, and then I would have covered the whole city. But I think it's because I know the city so well, and I approach writing as a kind of painting, the way a painter would approach a canvas. I like to describe things that I see around me, and so it's very kind of vivid. It's about description for me, but also I think because the London that I know I don't really see it reflected very much in literary fiction or in fiction as a whole. I don't really see Black London very much depicted, so it's really important to me to give an accurate picture of what my London is like, and it's full of, I see Black culture everywhere. It's all over London, and so I'm really trying to honour that and to show it and to describe it. But my novels travel. They always travel somewhere. So the first novel travels to Nigeria, and the second one travels to Jamaica, because I'm trying to say something about the identity of my Londoners and the identity of Black Britishness and how it's made up of other places. The new novel, Ordinary People, doesn't travel to a Caribbean or African country. It travels to a European country, and I think I was trying to make a point about ownership and owning London. So, you know, this is where we live. This is where I'm from, and to really stamp that onto people's consciousness, that Blackness is not other. It's a part of Britishness.
Do you want to just give us a little taste of London in Ordinary People just before we pick up on that?
Yeah, I'll just read from the opening. And so it's set in. So this novel is about 2 couples and their relationship crises over 1 year, which starts with the election of Barack Obama in 2008. So it opens with a party to celebrate his election. So I'll just read you from that scene. To celebrate Obama's election, the Wiley brothers threw a party at their house in Crystal Palace. They lived near the park, where the transmitting tower loomed up towards the heavens like a lesser Eiffel, stern and metallic by day, red and lit up by night. overlooking the surrounding London boroughs and the home counties beyond, and harbouring in the green land at its feet the remains of the former glass kingdom, the lake, the maze, the broken Greek statues, the eroded stone lions, and the dinosaurs made of old science. The Wileys were originally from north of the river and had moved to the south for its creative energy and the charisma of its poverty. They were conscious of their privilege and wanted to be seen as having survived it spiritually. Bruce, the older, was a well-known photographer, his studio a labyrinth of lights and darkness at the rear of the house. Gabriel was an economist. They were opposites in all things. Bruce was large, Gabriel was thin. Bruce drank, Gabriel did not. Bruce did not own a suit, Gabriel was a suit. But they threw a party with shared commitment and singular intent. First, they decided on their guest list, which featured all the important, successful, and beautiful people they knew, such as lawyers, journalists, actors, politicians. Next, they arranged for the 3 essential ingredients: drinks, food, music. The party was scheduled for the Saturday immediately following the election, so they didn't have much time. They bought bottles of champagne and macadamias and chicken wings, all the while going over the highlights of their sleepless Tuesday night when they had watched the blue states eating up the red states and Jesse Jackson's tears in Grant Park and the 4 Obamas strolling out victorious onto the bulletproofed stage. Then the people came. They came from all over, from the towns across the river and the blocks of the A205, from the outer suburbs and the neighbouring streets. They came wearing faux fur coats with skinny jeans, shiny, glinting Oxford Circus sandals, and flashy shirts. They too had stayed up on Tuesday night watching blue eat red, and the Obama daughters walking out onto the stage in their small, well-tailored dresses and their excited shoes had reminded many of them of the 4 little girls bombed 45 years before in the church in Alabama by the Ku Klux Klan. That, perhaps, was what made Jesse Jackson cry, that they walked in their flames, and it was impossible to look at this new advancement of history without also seeing the older, more terrible one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You managed to weave in huge historical moments, so in or bookend rather. So in Ordinary People, we have Obama at the beginning and the death of Michael Jackson at the end. In 26A, the royal wedding and the death of Princess Di. I say huge historical moments, but within context. In The Wonder, you refer to the Acton tornado of 1954, and we've got the Notting Hill riots, etc. Can you tell us a little bit about history in your contemporary London, in your bringing contemporary London to life? Why, how you use that sort of history, and why?
Well, I think history it's part of the present, and it's quite important to me to show the contexts of my characters and of their lives. I'm writing about contemporary characters mostly, but I think it gives them a grounding and a certain truthfulness and verisimilitude if they're actually grounded in a certain historical story. So the second book, The Wonder, is about a Jamaican dancer who comes over to the UK and makes a name for himself and forms a company. And it's about his son who 30 years later is trying to find out what happened to his father. And his father was part of that wave of immigration that came over from the West Indies. And you know, we read a lot about the large themes of Black history. Like there's lots of books that deal with slavery and that deal with aspects of migration. but it's really important in my work to show the individual stories within those larger stories, to give a sense of sort of a deeper humanity to the characters. I'm really trying to get to the heart of the characters and show the smaller stories in the bigger stories. And you know, the thing about Obama, because people have said to me, why do you open a book about London with Obama? How is that relevant to a portrait of London? But what happens in America and what happens in Africa and what happens in the Caribbean, there's a sense of collective identity and ownership in Black life. So the election of Obama was a huge moment for me personally, but it was a huge moment for the world as well. And the humanization of Blackness is at the heart of my work. So using the history is essential.
You wrote an essay on Baldwin, and you referred to the obligation to activism inside and outside art. And I just wondered, as a contemporary writer, where do you sit on the activist arts spectrum, for want of a better word? I mean, do you feel? I mean, I feel that you're very subtle in your activism, if you like. Do you think you are, or are you trying to shout a bit louder than that?
Well,
it's subtle but effective.
First and foremost, I'm telling stories and playing with language. Those are the most important things to me, and presenting characters that I care about. I love Baldwin, and Baldwin's one of the writers who I'm completely in awe of. There's so much generosity and commitment in his work to presenting Blackness in all of its joy and pain. And that I think that as a Black writer, it's difficult not to be political. I mean, because race has been kind of attached to our work. It's as if race has been given to us as our theme, and we're the ones that have to negotiate it and dissect it and deconstruct it. But I see it, race it's a universal. There's a universal obligation to dissect race, and that's one of the things that I'm always aware of, that race isn't my problem. You know, it's everybody's problem, but it's also inherent in my work. So in that sense, whether I'm writing about, because there are moments in Ordinary People that they seem like really small moments. Like my character Michael, he's walking into a party, and it's like a work function, and he's wondering if he's going to be the only Black person in the room, and that is at the forefront of his mind. And we walk around with this sense of alienation all the time, and so even a small moment like that is a deeply political moment. It's about how he's wearing his history. We wear our history all the time in everything we do.
And I think, as came up in a discussion yesterday, obviously class is entwined in all of that, and a sense of belonging. And your characters are Lucas in The Wonder, Melissa, Michael, everybody's repositioning and trying to work out where they fit, if they fit.
Yeah.
I just wonder, because Ordinary People is very, I mean, we're right in the middle of gentrified areas of London, middle class.
Ordinary People is it's specifically about a middle class Blackness, which we just don't see. It's like what Carol Phillips was saying yesterday, that Black identity in Britain is considered working class identity, especially also if you look at representations of Blackness in the media and in our films and our literature, that, you know, it's really easy to see young Black boys shooting each other and black people who are unemployed or who are in some kind of pathology. It's really hard to see depictions of just ordinary black life, and I think that's so important. It's important for young people to see themselves reflected around them in a way that is positive, and in a way that is just normal. We've been robbed of a sense of ordinariness.
Mm. And in terms of, for anyone who hasn't yet read Diana, the relationships are, it's in all of them, relationships is at the heart of all your novels, and sort of stuckness and togetherness or not togetherness. Everybody's either feeling trapped or struggling, or I just wondered because you really, it's incredibly moving, a lot of that, and Melissa's struggle in Ordinary People. What is it about relationships that says something about how we're living today, do you think, in your exploration of them? I mean, in Ordinary People, for example, Melissa's sort of almost like she's panicking trying to get out, but she kind of is quite glad she got in. Or maybe not, I don't know.
Well, Ordinary People it's about motherhood. Essentially, that's one of the main themes. About a woman's fight to keep a hold of her identity in the midst of motherhood and relationships. But it's not just about motherhood. It's about fatherhood and parenthood as well. And it's about how children can threaten one's identity and sense of individuality. It's quite important that it's not just written from a woman's point of view. I'm trying to present different points of view equally. I was quite influenced by certain books while I was reading, in my early reading for this book. I don't know if you read Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates and John Updike's Couples. Those two novels in particular were really, they had a deep impact on me because they showed domestic life and the impact of marriage and parenting on a sense of one's identity, but it was very much from a male point of view, and it presented the women as sort of unhappy and disappointed with their lives, and it kind of erased the women, I felt, at the same way as blaming her for the man's deterioration. And there was, I often write in order to correct something that I've read that is lacking in something that I've read. And there was a real lack of a convincing female consciousness. So I wanted to write that into this story of marriage and domesticity.
What about women like Zadie Smith or Andrea Levy, or people who have written about London in that way? In terms of inspiration, in terms of people you have looked to?
Female writers that I mean, I'm quite influenced by Jean Rhys. I like her emotional honesty and her emotional truth, and there's lots of I tend to be quite influenced by American writers, actually, like Lucia Berlin, the stories, short stories especially, and Grace Paley. But, I mean, I'm not really thinking about gender very much when I'm reading. I'm just thinking about gaps that I'm seeing and things that need to be filled in.
In the Wonder, Oscar tells Anthony's a dancer, that he has to push himself in order to dance. You have to risk all to dance your best. I wanted to ask you about taking risks creatively, and do you feel in these three that you've challenged yourself in that, or in what way do you feel you've Because you've written about taking risks and how you
Yeah.
like to take risks.
Yeah. Oh, novels are hard. I find novels excruciating to write, but they seem to be my natural form. As I've journeyed through my writing, I've always been looking for the form that suits me best. So I started off journaling, and which became poetry, and then I found that the poetry was too limited. It was too small. I wanted something bigger, so I started trying to write short stories, and then journalism. Nothing was big enough, and then the novel seems like it gives me enough space to play and to sprawl around and to manipulate language and to create characters and worlds and use setting. But so they're incredibly satisfying when they work, but it takes me a long, long time for it to work and to even know what I'm doing with a novel. So every novel is a huge risk. With Ordinary People, there was, I usually spend the first couple of years with a novel not really knowing what I'm doing and what the story is, and I'm really just playing with possibilities. And there was a particular a paragraph that I wrote that I thought, okay, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. There's something pivotal about that paragraph. I know that paragraph is going to be in this book, but I didn't know where. And it was so hard. It was like I was trying to make that one paragraph work. And once I knew where that paragraph went, then I knew that the novel was going to work. And I didn't actually know that until I was very near the end of the novel, which was about year 6. So
it took you 7 years.
It took 7 years altogether, but it wasn't until year 6 that I knew it was going to work. So it's great risk and it's great pain, but when you reach that moment where you know it's going to work, that is absolutely thrilling, and it makes those years and years of work worth it.
Well, it is worth it, by the way. Music also. So Ordinary People has got a soundtrack to it. In fact, it's on Spotify for those of you who want to listen to it and don't want to read the book. You can listen to the soundtrack. But the soundtrack is, is absolutely integral to almost every beat, every chapter, and it's very rhythmic, like in The Wander as well. There's a lot of movement in Diana's work, and I don't know if that comes from you being a dancer, just to be very crude about it, or what's that about?
I think I'm always trying to find ways to entertain myself at my desk, partly. I like to make myself laugh at my desk, and I don't actually listen to music while I'm writing, but I do listen to music immediately after writing, usually, because it loosens out my brain cells. But I didn't actually intend to have a soundtrack. It just happened as I was writing. There were there's particular moments like the Obama party and where Michael and Melissa, my main couple, are moving house. They're moving over to South London. They're crossing the river and they listen to some music in the car. And there's another scene where Michael's on his way to work and he's listening to the John Legend album Get Lifted, and that album John Legend is quite instrumental. It becomes an accompaniment to Michael's romantic history and psychology. And as I was writing, I became really interested in this idea of how you can use music to tell the story. It became like a prop and a guide, and it just gave me the energy to keep going with the novel. And then once it was actually ready for publication, my publisher was very kind enough to actually create a playlist, which was great. So now people think of it as a musical novel, and I wouldn't suggest listening to music as you're reading it, because that's probably a bit distracting, but
afterwards is quite
maybe
good.
afterwards.
Yeah, and then you go back.
Or intermittently.
Could we have a little bit from The Wonder?
Yeah.
Because this is my personal favourite, which is a bit off-piece, but I'm just going to say that.
Yeah, this is my underrated novel.
It's a fantastic So just give us a sense of, perhaps tell us a little bit about where we are. Or...
Okay, so Part of the Wonder is set in Jamaica, and the dancer who comes over from Jamaica to London, his name is Anthony, and this is a depiction of him as a boy, this chapter. But this particular section is actually about his father who disappears. And Anthony then spends his whole life really looking for his father in the same way that Anthony's son Lucas does after him. So this is where that sense of searching begins. So Mr. Rogers is supposed to be getting married to Anthony's mother, Florence. After years of stalling, Mr. Rogers had finally made his motions towards a matrimonial life. He hadn't proposed as such. It would be more accurate to say that he had agreed. It was a starry night. He was rum dizzy. Florence, in a pretty slip, was standing in the doorway that led out to the veranda, and one of her arms was raised up near her face and folded around the doorframe, her eyes darker than he'd ever seen them. She smiled with that same size gap in her teeth as his and said, "Mr. Rogers, I've missed you. Why you don't come lie down and put your feet by my feet?" Mr. Rogers had a calm and beautiful feeling then beneath the rum stars, that this girl would always be this girl, that with this girl he could go and then return, and she would always say something like this, "Put your feet by my feet." And then it had struck him what a good and perfect thing the steady family unit was. What a joy it was to have someone to return to. What a fine son they'd made together. How sweet and rich it would be to people the hills of St. Mary's and beyond with more little Anthonys. 50 minutes later, with his feet by her feet and his hips still pressed upon her hips, he sighed into the warm right ear of his woman, "You are my safe and always one," to which Florence had whispered back a not unfamiliar suggestion, "Well, Mr. Rogers, we might get married." And this time, Mr. Rogers said yes.
Oh. So we do leave London occasionally and go to... In fact, we also go to Germany and Holland in the Wonder.
And Denmark.
Yeah, and Denmark. Talking of families, and I'd like to talk to you a bit about the sort of personal and fictional. So 26A, your first book, was very, very about, completely about a family that is a rite of passage, really, from a family who are based in Neasden. And it's about, well, you can tell us what it's about, but it's about twins, and sadly one of the twins takes her own life, which also happened to you. And I'd like you to perhaps talk to us a little bit about how the personal and the fictional, and you were also a dancer and you wrote The Wonder, and you're now a mother.
Yes.
So I don't know how does personal life and the boundaries of that with your work, your creative work, sit with the tension between the two, I suppose?
Well, the desire to write often comes from some extreme emotion that I've experienced that has come from an extreme situation. And well, because I first started journaling, that's how I started writing, and it always came from an overflowing of feeling, not being able to contain emotions within, and having to write them down, having to put them somewhere else that was outside, and to make them into pictures and something that was structured and something that I could look at and reflect on. I found it helpful, and so when my twin passed away, it was one of those situations of something being too big. It was catastrophic. It was too large not to record in some way. I mean, I also wanted to build a monument to her and to to create something that would last beyond her, to show that she had existed, because it seemed like it was such a waste, and I wanted there to be something that I could pick up that showed who she was and contained who she was. When I was trying to write 26A, it took me a long time to start because I was worried about using the personal material and using autobiography, but I knew I didn't want to write a memoir. I didn't, because I saw it as a story with a dramatic potential. I felt a very strong feeling when she passed away that her body had inhabited my body, and that she was somehow acting and speaking through me. And that was the dramatic crux of the story. So it was a really good story, and I wanted to tell that story, but I also wanted to honor her. But I think the way I get round using the personal now, I've come to see it as an expression of not just personal experience, but collective experience. That there's probably somebody out there who has felt the same thing or would benefit from this expressing in some way. And literature for me has always been a source of comfort, and that's something that I try and give to the world, a sense of being understood by a book. Books can be so validating of who you are. Sometimes you can read a sentence in a book that just seems to encapsulate something that you felt or a sense of yourself, and that can be so helpful in just being able to walk through the world and exist in the world.
Can we just have a little moment from 26A to put
sure.
that before we open up? Okay, rather than doing it at the end.
Okay, I'll just read a little section about the twins, Georgia and Bessie, their names are. So this is them as children. Georgia and Bessie didn't believe in looking absolutely the same, because that was there in their faces. Almost, though Georgia's features were fuller. She had rubiness in her lips and wider, browner, far-away eyes with lashes that hit the sky. But these differences were almost invisible to outsiders. They were the same, like dolls. They were two-ness in oneness. The real differences, the ones that mattered most, were inside, under clothes and in the soul. There was light and there was shade. If they wore different colors, it meant that there could be whole people inside themselves, because people could see that Georgia was Georgia in turquoise and Bessie was Bessie in pink. There were pink thoughts and turquoise thoughts with white stripes. This meant so much more than a red stitch inside the collar, which was how Ida, their mother, and the teachers used to differentiate, their old green puffer jackets when they were 6, before they discovered the ability of color to make a half into a one, a half of green into a whole land of pink, a half a question, for sometimes even their parents couldn't tell one from the other, into a whole turquoise question.
Thank you.
I hope you got that, sorry.
Yes, so let's open it out for some questions before we carry on. Andre? Thank you for that reading.
Hi, I don't know if you probably touched on this a bit, but you once said, as a writer, you can sometimes be quite ruthless. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, it's like what I was just saying about seeing the dramatic potential in a very tragic story about personal loss and suicide. I think that there is a ruthlessness, and I think without that ruthlessness, I wouldn't be able to tell the stories that I tell, because it's a way of undressing someone, actually, and it can be very exposing. That the process of writing can be very exposing, and but it's the commitment to needing and really wanting to tell the story. And I mean, I love drama, and I can really recognize a good story. I think that's one of the tenets of a writer, is you have to be able to recognize a good story. And in order to tell that story, you would almost sell your own grandmother to be able to tell that story. It takes that level of commitment and faith to just get through the slog of a novel. A novel is a mountain, it's an ocean, and without the ruthlessness, it's impossible.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? I've got lots more questions to ask Diana, if anyone. Anthony.
Hello, is that what, yeah. I'm really interested in the ruthlessness thing, because other writers that I've spoken to, not all of them are as frank about it as you are. But I think that I understand what you're saying there, but notwithstanding that, over and above, you know, like I say, your very frank sort of declaration of what you need to do to get it done in the right way, was it a cathartic experience, though, writing about your sister? If you hadn't written the book, would you feel less resolved about what happened to her?
Yeah, I've been asked this question before, and yeah, it was the absolute opposite. It wasn't cathartic at all. It wasn't. It was actually it was very difficult, and I think the reason why it was so difficult is because when you're using autobiographical material in a dramatic story, when you're telling it as fiction, you have to be able to disassociate yourself, your feelings from the characters in the novel. They need to be able to function as real characters, and they need to, you know, move and speak and feel outside of you. And so that takes a long-term disassociation from yourself and the characters. So it meant that I had to put feelings on hold for a very long time. It took me 4 or 5 years to write it, and I couldn't really deal with the grief, because I wouldn't have been able to tell the story. So
but in which case, is there a danger that you actually, because there's no closure about anything like that, it's obviously a myth, but that you actually end up being you're forcing yourself into a position where you could end up being quite numb to the experience?
No, I think that I think it's a bit of a myth that catastrophic experiences such as tragic loss of a loved one or any kind of tragedy, I don't think we really ever get over things. I think we continue and we find a way of living while carrying those things. And I think I think you need a certain numbness. There is a certain numbness that you need in order to carry on. But there's particular moments that I'm unable to digest of my sister's death. There's particular things about it that are indigestible. So there's a certain numbness that's set in order to just live, in order to live with that. And I think that's a common response and a common fact of grief, of living with grief. It's not finite. It's infinite, and it forms you and shapes you continually as you go through your life.
Anyone else? Yep, the back there. We're guessing.
Thank you. Would you mind sharing with us a bit your process for creation? You talked about creating the novel, taking a long time, and being excruciating. So anything you can share, whether you write in pencil, pen, type,
Okay.
middle of the night, first thing in the morning.
Okay. Well, I try and be quite disciplined because I'm a Virgo. I like things to be neat and orderly, but it never is neat and orderly, no matter how much I try. I constantly make lists of things and plans. I try and plan. What I try and do is to try and get a list of events that are going to take place in the novel on one A4 sheet of paper and in some kind of order. And I find that I need that with me. Like I put it on the wall next to my desk so that when I get lost in the chaos of writing, I can just look at that sheet. And but it also can be limiting, so I can't cling to that sheet of paper too tightly. I try and write all day. When I'm in the thick of writing, I try and write from around 9 or 10 until around 3, 4, when I have to pick up the children. And I'll write about 1,000 words, try and get 1,000 words done. Sometimes 600. So 600 is a bad day. 1,000, 1,200 is a good day. And I just keep going and trying to build up word counts, 4,000 or 5,000 a week. That's the plan, but there are some weeks where it doesn't go like that. I'll get to 300 a day. And so, yeah, it will just go, a novel takes as long as it's going to take. I think there's such a pressure on writers these days, more and more, to produce novel after novel, to be really, really quick. And I think it can be very dangerous to rush yourself, and because it takes time to gestate an idea, and for characters to form, and for a structure to arrive, and then for the language to sing. You need to go over it over and over and over again. I try and just be aware of that when there's if I feel a sense of panic about, oh, this is never going to be finished. I try and remember that a novel is its own challenge and its own country, and you just have to be true to the process of making that novel exist. You have to give yourself to it.
I'm just going to jump in here. There are themes. Mental health is quite a theme in Diana's work, and sort of hope and disappointment in one breath, really. But I'm interested when you say structurally. So in Ordinary People, there's a scene, a rather shocking scene of a knife crime, a killing of a young boy, and it's. I use the word casually. You handle it casually with the greatest care, but it's something that happens and it moves on, and it's very much just part of the landscape of where Melissa and Michael are living. Was that very deliberate, that you didn't make more of it than a happening and almost an everyday happening, which is not untrue at all at the moment?
Yeah, because I was writing a portrait of London, so I wanted to be true to what London life was like. And at the time when I was writing it, there was the knife crime. Well, the knife crime statistics were going up and up and up, and as they are now. And I felt that even though I didn't want to write about stereotypical themes connected with blackness, I felt that was something that I just couldn't ignore, and that I had a responsibility to show that, because my characters, they would witness that. Where I was living at the time, there were killings happening just around the way, and in this very random way, which was quite terrifying. But at the same time, I knew that I didn't want it to be the central theme. I didn't want to be a central theme in the story, but I felt I had a duty to those young kids, and to show that those killings beyond the statistics that we see in the news all the time, and those pictures, we don't hear much about the insides of those lives who are witnessing these killings.
Any final questions before I ask Diana what you're working on next? Hang on, no. What you're working on next, given that. What are you working on next? Or do you want to not tell us?
Yeah, I can't really tell you. It's another book or two. I'm trying to do two at
That's
once.
a relief, anyway.
It's not a good idea.
Also, one thing is apparently you buy a new chair after each book. What's that? Is that right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I like chairs.
Have you only got 3 chairs in your house?
I've
or
got
you-
more chairs, but I've got special chairs that I've got after books. I think because I just feel like I deserve a treat after a novel because it's been so hard. It has to be a relaxing. It can't be this kind of chair. It has to be a relaxing, large chair.
Hammock.
Like the last one I wrote, when I finished Ordinary People, I bought a swinging chair. It was a big, round, cushiony, swinging one. It can't just be one of these uncomfortable chairs.
No. So it's 1,000 words a day, and then you get a chair at the end of it, which is very good. So Ordinary People is for sale. 26A and The Wonder are available online, because I've done it. It's very easy to do. And they're all absolutely fantastic, and I urge you all to go and buy. And Diana will be happy to sign Ordinary People outside or wherever now. So thank you very much, Diana.
Thank you.